So Clarke, my first question for you is very simple. Why are you running for Congress?
Well, it's a great question. I feel like we need to restore courage, heart, and decency in the political process. I feel like that's missing in Washington right now, and I want to provide those examples for my own kids and for other kids. Healthcare is really an issue that inspired me to run, having worked on Arkansas Works, expanding access to care here in Arkansas for 300,000 Arkansans, and then personal interactions I had with my own constituents who needed access to care through Medicaid. And then my own personal health care experience when I was diagnosed with bladder cancer last summer just really drove home to me that in this world, health really comes first, because if you're not healthy, you can't work or take care of your family. If you're a kid, you can't go to school and develop. So I think we need to protect the access to care that we have now and expand that access and make care more affordable. So those are really kind of big picture, the two big things that inspired me to run.
Okay, and my second question for you is, how has your personal experience prepared you for this office?
I would say the most relevant experience I have is in the state legislature. I was there in a scenario where Democrats are in a distinct minority, but I was still able to work across the aisle and get things done. I think it's because the way I approach legislation, I understand that a lot of times we share common goals even if we come at them from a different perspective. So I would reach across the aisle and sit down with my fellow legislators, both Democrats and Republican, figure out what our shared goals were, and then work together in a collaborative way rather than a combative way to figure out how to get there together. And I was able to do that on issues like pre-K funding, healthcare, as I mentioned, a paid maternity leave program, criminal justice reform, reducing taxes for middle-class citizens and veterans in Arkansas. So my experience in legislature, I feel like, is the best experience to prepare me to serve in Congress.
Okay, and then third question is, what do you think that you bring to the table that the other candidates don't?
Well, I really only have good things to say about the other candidates. I think they're all good people. I think, again, the record that I have to run on, I was able to win in a difficult political environment in 2014, and this race is going to be very important. There are going to be a lot of resources poured into it, and I've already shown that I can win once, and I believe that I can do it again. And then again, I think just being effective. It's great to I have a record of being effective and a record on standing up for issues that are important to everyday Arkansans and that make a difference in their lives on an everyday basis. So those are some of the traits that I would point to.
And so some of the questions that are more tailored to you, and you touched on one of these previously, but healthcare and health insurance are two of the most debated and divisive topics that we're facing in our country right now. Has your recent health scare changed your views on healthcare, and what are those views?
The first point is that I believe healthcare is a right, that every American has a right to quality, affordable healthcare. And that was driven home through my experience in the legislature, working on Arkansas Works with 300,000 Arkansans who depend on that program for access to care. And then, as I mentioned, my interactions with constituents. I'll just give you one quick example. I had a constituent who called me early in my term in the legislature, and he had a daughter and granddaughter who were 100% eligible for Medicaid, but they'd been on the waiting list for 6 months. And his granddaughter couldn't go to school until she got medication that she could only get after they were enrolled. And I was able to make a call to DHS and expedite their enrollment. And he called me after they were enrolled the next day, and you could just hear in his voice what a difference that made for their family's life. And so it was already an extremely important issue for me, and the American Health Care Act, which would have stripped health care away from millions of Americans and a lot here at home in Arkansas. That's when I first started thinking about running for Congress. And then later that summer is when I was diagnosed with bladder cancer, and I'm thankful to be able to say that I'm 100% cancer-free today. But that moment when a doctor tells you that you have cancer, that's a life-changing moment. And the notion of having access to care without dying or going bankrupt when you have a pre-existing condition became a lot less abstract for me in that moment. And when I was able to recover from that through my treatment and frankly working through it from a mental standpoint as well, I was more motivated than ever to make sure that every Arkansan and every American has access to care, regardless of how much money they have in their pocket and whether they have a pre-existing condition or not.
And another very divisive topic is gun control, gun reform. You were obviously a part of the Arkansas legislature when gun rights were expanded last year. What are your thoughts on, as a nation, what we should do about a growing violence problem while also understanding the rights of Americans?
I think we can do both at the same time. I'm a gun owner. I have shotguns in my house. I grew up in Arkansas duck hunting, and my dad taught me to shoot on our family farm. And so the problem is not with responsible gun owners like myself who just want to be able to protect their family and hunt. And those rights are never going anywhere. We can protect those rights, and I would always do that. At the same time, there are some common sense gun safety measures that we can take that will protect Americans. I proposed 2 in the state legislature last year. The first was a child access prevention law. I learned of a 7-year-old boy in my legislative district who acquired his aunt's pistol and fatally shot himself. And that broke my heart, and I looked into that and realized it happens hundreds of times across the country each year. So that was one proposal I had, and then another was that if you're convicted of misdemeanor domestic violence, either as a spouse, which is current federal law, or as a dating partner, which is not, then you forfeit the right to own or possess a firearm. But closing gun show and online loopholes and strengthen our background checks, especially for mental health, and just preventing weapons of war that are designed for combat situations overseas from being used domestically on our own citizens, primarily our children. These are measures that the overwhelming majority of Americans support, and so it's just a matter of getting it done. And really what it comes down to is having members of Congress who have the guts to make something happen. And I would be one of those. So what I think, to finish where I started, where we can protect Americans, but also protect our rights to hunt and protect our family all at the same time.
Do you think the constituents in this district could get on board with those sorts of pieces of legislation? Absolutely.
I mean, the conversations that I've had in the community, the 2 that I sponsored last year, unfortunately they didn't become law, but the 2 that I sponsored last year, I've had overwhelming support in my conversations in the community about those. And the other ones that I mentioned, there are others. You know, we have to provide real support to the CDC to research the causes of gun violence. I think there's overwhelming support for that. If you're on the FBI's terrorist watch list and can't fly on an airplane, you should not be able to buy a gun. The conversations I'm having in the communities, going door to door in this campaign, I feel very strong support for these common sense measures that will save American lives.
Okay, Clarke Tucker, thank you.
Thank you, Winnie.